Hello and welcome to my little bookish corner of the internet. My name's Harriet. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Peter Pan by J M Barrie. I'm going to be comparing it to the film adaptations, the two most popular ones, so the Disney one and the Universal one. So let's get started. Now, I've wanted to read Peter Pan for a really long time now. I can't honestly remember whose channel I saw it on, but they basically said that there were things in this book that they weren't expecting to read about, and that really intrigued me. So I really wanted to see how different it was going to be from the two films that I loved watching when I was a kid, and also now looking at it from an adult's perspective and how I view the characters and the things that are happening in the book. Now, in terms of the films, the animated Disney film is very whimsical and light-hearted, and Peter, he can be a little bit difficult at times because obviously he's a child, so he does have childish tendencies. But there's no kind of maliciousness there or really any violence or anything like that you see. I mean, it is a kid's film, so it was made for kids. It's not going to have any like gore or anything in there. And a lot of it is kind of given to you exactly as it is and nothing is really explained. For example, like where Neverland comes from and why it exists and why the children go there, things like that. It's just an adventure story where they go there, they have their adventure and then they come home safe. So that is the Disney adaptation, and then the Universal live action. I find that that is a little bit more true to the book. So it does touch on things like Mrs. Darling's kiss. It touches on also a little bit more about Hook and makes Hook seem like more of a person as opposed to just a villain like it did in the Disney adaptation. And it does also focus in on the lives of the Lost Boys as well, which you don't get a lot in the animated version. I find that they feel a little bit more real and they have a bit more of a backstory, which was nice. And the ending of that live action book as well is kind of similar to the ending of the book, but there are different things as well. So I'll talk about them now. I'll try not to give away any spoilers or anything like that. But yeah, let's get into the book. So if you didn't really know the story about Peter Pan, I'm sure most of you will know. You may have seen films or had this read to you as a child or different versions of this book. But basically we are following the Darling children. There's three of them. So there's Wendy, John and Michael. And they meet Peter Pan, who is this kind of magical being who is a boy, a young boy, and he lives in Neverland, where it's said that he never grows up. And Wendy, who is one of the Darling children, she tells stories to John and Michael, her brothers, at night time, and sometimes Peter will come and listen. And then one day he decides that he wants to take them to Neverland with him so that Wendy can be a storyteller to the Lost Boys who he lives with. And we have also got other characters in here. So we've got Tinkerbell, who is a fairy, and she's like a companion to Peter. She's really enamoured with him. We've got Hook, who is Peter's arch nemesis, and he is missing one of his hands and has replaced it with a hook. And then we've got a whole array of different pirates and things in here as well. So it is a very magical and whimsical children's novel. However, there are some parts of the story that feel very mature and also really dark. So I was surprised at how dark this novel is. There is a lot of things in here that I think as a kid maybe you wouldn't pick up on it, but as an adult it really stood out to me as something that I probably wouldn't want to read to my kids. But saying that, even though there are parts that are quite violent, and that may seem inappropriate now, think about books by the Grimm brothers. They are so violent and really gory and really, really dark. So I feel like maybe storytelling for children has changed in the past couple of decades and things just aren't quite the same anymore. So bear in mind if you do read this book that it is quite old and it was written in a different time for a different generation of kids who had interest in different things. And yeah, even though it is really dark, it's still such a wonderful children's story. Now, in terms of the dark sides of things, Peter is quite a malicious character in this novel. It seems like all he really cares about is his personal gain and what people can do for him, and he's very assertive and he's a very authoritative figure to the Lost Boys and to the Darling children as well. And you really get to see that malicious side of him when he takes the Darling children because he doesn't want them to go back to their parents. He wants to keep them for himself. And also the Lost Boys, they don't actually stop growing up in Neverland. So when they get older, Peter disposes of them and then he'll replace them with other children. And there is quite a big backstory about Peter and kind of why he is the way he is, where he is, It gets touched on a little bit. I believe that there is another novel before this that's kind of like more of a backstory about Peter. I haven't read that personally, but I would be interested in it. But yeah, you also get a backstory into how Peter gets the Lost Boys and where they come from and things like that. They don't actually stop growing up in Neverland, which is something that I didn't know about when I was younger. You also don't really get to see that in the films. They kind of skip over that bit, and they kind of skim over the fact that the Lost Boys and Peter just love to kill people, whether it's pirates or Indians. They're quite a violent group. There is also very, very briefly one sentence in this book, and I will read it to you. Basically, Peter's fallen asleep on the floor, and this is what happens. After a time, he fell asleep, and some unsteady fairies had to climb over him on their way home from an orgy. Yeah, it's just not what I was really expecting to read in a children's book. Like, how would a child know what that is? They're probably going to ask what the word means, depending how old they are. Or in this generation, they'll probably just look it up on their phones, and then I hate to think what would come up. But again, I don't know if this is something that is in a lot of older children's books, if they were more mature back then, or if it was kind of expected of them to know these kind of things or to not ask questions. I'm really, really not sure. When I read it, my mouth just dropped open. I was like, am I sure this is a children's book? Because I'm not 100% sure. But I did speak to one of my friends at work about this, and they kind of told me a bit of backstory about the fays, the fairies, and it's also touched on in here as well. They have very strong emotions, and Tinkerbell, for example, can only really feel one super strong emotion at one time. So that is why she's very jealous throughout the whole book. She doesn't want Wendy and Peter to kind of be around each other. She wants Peter all for herself. And that's why all she can see is rage and jealousy. So I suppose when they have affection for other fairies and other beings, either lust or infatuation or something takes over, and perhaps that's why they have the orgies. But yeah, it was just very, very strange. And it was weird to read it. But other than that, really the only dark parts of this story are the kind of origin of where it came from. Obviously, the author's brother died when he was quite young, and it has been said that that is what the story is kind of based on. So there's that, and then there's also the violence between Peter and Hook, and kind of the bloody history between all of the people in Neverland. And one thing that was super different from both of the adaptations as well was the ending. There was like an extra chapter that I didn't expect and that I didn't even know existed in the story, that follows Wendy when she's older and her daughter as well. Now, if you've seen Peter Pan Return to Neverland, we get to meet Wendy's daughter, but that's a completely different story to how this book ends. It kind of sets it up, I suppose, for that film. But it was quite a sad ending, actually. I felt a little bit emotional for the characters towards the end there, and it was really hard to see Wendy grown up with a child, because obviously she can't go back with Peter. And Peter's mind is very different to Wendy's as well, so obviously she has grown up and Peter doesn't grow up. He's one of the few people in Neverland that doesn't actually grow up. So he's coming back as a child and seeing her as an adult, and that was really hard to read. But overall, this book is phenomenal. There is a reason why it's a classic. It's written so beautifully and the world is so rich, and I just really enjoyed it. And this edition in particular is beautiful because it is illustrated. It has watercolour paintings throughout it. You've probably seen it already on my channel. I do show it off quite a bit. Ever since I found it in the charity shop, it's all I've been wanting to show people, so yeah, you've probably seen the inside of it, but if not, you can check out my Instagram. I've posted pictures of it before. But yeah, overall, this was a 5-star read for me. I found it really entertaining and I read it really quickly, and I'm kind of sad that it's taken me this long to read it. If you're looking for a really lovely children's story that is a little bit dark and a little bit strange, I definitely recommend picking this up. But that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!